Hi, are you ready for chapter 4 of Harriet the Spy? The next afternoon, after her cake and milk, Harriet went straight to Mrs. Plummer's house. She knew it was dangerous, but once her curiosity was aroused, she had never been able to give up a spot on her route. As she got to the house, she saw little Joe Curry in conversation with the maid. She sidled around the front, took a ball from her pocket that she always carried for such moments, and began to engage in an innocent-looking game of ball right in front of them. Little Joe was leaning against the door. He always looked tired when he wasn't eating. The maid sounded very aggravated. "Haven't got the change. She went off and left me without a cent." "Well, when will she be back? I could come back." "Lord knows. When she goes to Elizabeth Arden, she sometimes is gone all day. Lots of work to do on her, you know." The maid giggled nastily. Let's stop a second. Elizabeth Arden is like a ladies' beauty salon, spa. They fix your hair, they do your makeup, they may give you a facial. So Mrs. Plummer has gone to Elizabeth Arden. Man, she got all that jack and don't pay. They all alike. More they got, less they pay. And with that pronouncement, little Joe shuffled off back for his afternoon snack. Harriet looked unconcerned as he went past. The maid went inside. Harriet leaned against the hydrant and wrote, "I wonder what they do to her all day. I once saw my mother in a mud pack. They'll never get me in a mud pack." She slammed her book and went to the Del Santos. The store was terribly busy. Everyone was running to and fro, even Franca, who usually had to be propped up somewhere. Little Joe wasn't even back yet. "Well," thought Harriet, "this looks like a rotten spy day." She checked Mrs. Plummer and the Del Santos off her list and went on to the Robinsons, the next people on the route. The Robinsons were a couple who lived in a duplex on 88th Street. When they were alone, they never said a word to each other. Harriet liked to watch them when they had company because it made her laugh to see them showing off their house. Because the Robinsons had only one problem. They thought they were perfect. Luckily, their living room was on the ground floor of the duplex. Harriet scurried through the back passageway to the garden, and there, by leaning around a box kept for garden tools, she could see in without being seen. The Robinsons were sitting, as they always were, staring into space. They never worked, and what was worse, they never even read anything. They bought things and brought them home, and then they had people in to look at them. Otherwise, they didn't seem to do a blessed thing. The doorbell rang. "Ah," said Mrs. Robinson, "there they are now." She got up sedately and walked slowly, even though she had obviously been sitting there waiting for the ring. She looked critically as Mr. Robinson adjusted his smoking jacket and then went to the door. "Come in, Jack. Martha, how lovely to see you. It's been so long. How long will you be in town?" Well, look before you go a step further, Look, Martha, look at these lovely vinyl squares I just got put in. Aren't they just perfect?" "Well, yes, they are. And that chest in the corner, isn't that a find?" "Well, it's just—" Mr. Robinson stood up. "Hello there, Jack." "Hi there, fellow, long time no—" "Hi, Jack, I want to show you my gun collection. You haven't been here since I got 2 new ones. Just can't come in here and—" They disappeared from Harriet's view. There is a picture of the Robinsons. They just sit. They don't even read, Harriet said. "Oh, imagine that." "Martha, come here. You must see the— Oh, here, put your coat and purse down on the perfect place. This 18th century luggage rack. Isn't it divine?" "Why, yes, it's— Look, come here. Come right over here. Now, isn't that the most beautiful garden you've ever seen?" "Yes. Ooh, it's just— You know, Martha, we have the most perfect life." "You don't have children, do you, Grace?" "Why, no, but frankly, we think that's just perfect." Harriet, having ducked when they looked at the garden, fell over laughing. When she recovered herself, she grabbed her notebook. "Boy, old Golly told me once that some people think they're perfect but she ought to see these two. If they had a baby, it would laugh in its head all the time at them, so it's a good thing they don't. Also, it might not be perfect. Then they might kill it. I'm glad I'm not perfect. I'd be bored to death. Besides, if they're so great, why do they just sit there all day staring at nothing? They could be crazy and not even know it. She headed over to Harrison Withers' house. She liked to look at the bird cages he made, but more than that, she intended to be there when he got caught. The health department was forever trying to get in to catch him because he had too many cats. But Harrison Withers was very crafty. Whenever his doorbell rang, he looked out the window, and if the man ringing the bell wore a hat, he never let them in. All the men in the health department wore hats, and Harrison Withers didn't know anybody who wore a hat. Harriet climbed the steps to the top floor of his rooming house, and the last flight that led up to the roof. She could look through one skylight at a place where the paint had been worn away, and she was sure she wouldn't be seen from the inside. Here's Harriet on the roof, looking through the skylight at Harrison Withers. She peered down. As she did, she remembered that she had planned to watch him in the supermarket to see if he lived on kidneys like the cats. The cats were all milling around. She went to the other skylight. Sunlight flooded the other room, but here caught glints from tools, from the tiniest shining minarets which topped the cages. Harriet liked to look at this room. The cages were beautiful, soaring things, and when he was in this room, Harrison Withers was a happy man. Harriet liked to watch him work, admired the patience which allowed him to sit bent over for hours, twisting minuscule wires around ridiculously small connections. Oh, what luck! Harrison Withers was just coming through the door with a big shopping bag. Now she could see what he ate. All the cats followed him into the kitchen as he started taking things out of the bag. They started meowing and rubbing against his legs as he took kidney after kidney out of the bag. There now, children, he spoke to them gently. He always spoke very gently. There now, we're all going to eat now. Hello, everybody. Yes, yes, hello. Hello, David. Hello, Rasputin. Yes, Goethe. Alex, Sandra, Thomas Wolfe, Pat, Puck, Faulkner, Cassandra, Gloria, Circe, Koufax, Mary Jane, Willie Mays, Francis, Donna, Fred, Swan, Mickey Mantle, Sebastian, Yvonne, Jerusalem, and Barnaby. Hello, hello, hello. Harriet had counted this time. There were 26. That meant that the 26 plates were for the cats. What did he eat from? She watched as he pulled from the very bottom of the bag one small container of yogurt. Cats don't eat yogurt, thought Harriet. That must be what he eats. She watched while he fed the cats, and then spooned a bit of yogurt into his mouth. He went into his workroom, carrying the container, and closed the door behind him, because the cats were not allowed in that room. He sat at his work table before a particularly beautiful cage, a replica of a Victorian summer house. And here's a picture of Harrison Withers, and he's got wire in his hand to make the cages. Quiet descended upon the room as he sat studying the cage. His hand moved as if in a dream to put yogurt to one side. He looked lovingly, his eyes slightly gazed at one small unfinished portion of the structure. Very slowly he moved one piece 1/4 of an inch to the left. He sat back and looked at it a long time. Then he moved it back. Harriet wrote in her notebook, "He loves to do that. Is this what oh golly means?" She said people who love their work love life. Do some people hate life? Anyway, I wouldn't mind living like Harrison Withers because he looks happy. Except I wouldn't like all those cats. I might even like a dog. She took one last look at Harrison Withers, who was gently winding a piece of wire around 2 little curling pieces of wood. She got up then and went down to the street. In front of the house, she stopped to write. There's also that yogurt. Think of eating that all the time. There's nothing like a good tomato sandwich now and then. She decided to go see Janie a while before going on to the rest of her route. Janie lived in the garden duplex of a renovated brownstone off East End Avenue on 84th Street. Harriet rang the outside bell and pushed the door when it buzzed. Janie was standing inside her doorway, and she was in a foul mood. Harriet could tell just by looking at her. Janie always looked terribly cheerful when she was in her most angry mood. Harry figured it had to be that way because Janie's normal face was one of sheer rage. Today she smiled happily and sang out winningly, "Hello there, Harriet Welch." Oh, things couldn't be worse. Harriet walked toward her tentatively, as one would walk toward a mad dog, trying to see Janie's eyes more clearly. But Janie whipped inside the door. Harriet followed her. "What's the matter?" Harriet whispered. They were standing in the little foyer off the living room. "They're after me," whispered Janie, still smiling wildly. "Who?" "The Rat Pack." This is what Janie called her mother, her father, her brother, and her grandmother, who lived with them. "Why?" "My mother says I'm going to blow us all up and that I have to go to dancing school. Come past here, then they won't see us." Janie was hissing through her outrageous smile as she led them up the back steps to what she called her lab, which was really her room. One corner of her room had been stripped bare. The rug had been pulled back, exposing one corner where Janie had started to cut off the excess to get it out of the way, but which she had been stopped from doing by her mother in a hysterical fit. At that time there had been a large fight through which Janie grinned broadly, and her mother let her know that it didn't make a whit of difference if they didn't have ordinary rugs in labs. They catch fire, Janie had said, which had set off her mother again. That Janie had a rug in her room and that was going to stay there, and that the very best she could hope for was to have it rolled back. So it lay there in a roll at the end of the room. The lab itself was very complex and frightened Harriet whenever she looked at it, although she never would have admitted this to Janie. It consisted of rows and rows of shelves filled with bottles, all filled with suspicious fluids and looking as though you could turn into Mr. Hyde if you drank them. Only Janie understood anything, whatever about them, and she wouldn't explain, but instead called everyone a cretin who asked her. The maids wouldn't go near Janie's room, so years ago she had to learn to clean it herself. Harriet stood staring at all the equipment, while Janie rushed over to something boiling furiously on a Bunsen burner. She fiddled with it and turned lower, and then back to Harriet. "This time I really get it," she said thoughtfully, and went over and flopped on her bed. "You mean?" "Yes, they may take it all away." "Oh, they couldn't." "There have been people before me who have been misunderstood." "They could." And the way Janie said this, with her smile dropped and her eyes boring into Harriet's, made shivers run up Harriet's back. "What would you do?" "Leave, of course." One thing about Janie, thought Harriet, she never has a moment's hesitation about anything. "What's this about dancing school?" "Just wait, Buddy. They're going to get you, too. I heard my mother talking to your mother. Who ever heard of Pasteur going to dancing school? Or Madame Curie? Or Einstein?" Janie spit out the names. Harriet couldn't think of any spies who went to dancing school either. This was a bad development. "Whether they know it or not, I'm not going," Harriet said firmly. "They will never get me," Janie said very loudly. Then in a different tone, "Hey, Harriet, I've got to finish this experiment." "That's all right. I've got some things to put in my notebook. Go ahead." Janie got up briskly and went over to her lab table. "If I don't do it now, this thing will curdle." "What are you making?" There was no answer. There was never any answer when you asked Janie this, but Harriet did it every now and then just to be polite. It was something explosive. That much was perfectly clear. Harriet sat looking around her for a while at Janie's back, bent attentively over her work, as the sunlight coming through the window, the late afternoon sun, which looked sad and pleasant at the same time, and which reminded her abruptly of New Year's Day last year. There hadn't been anything important about that day. She just happened to look at the sun the same way. She leaned back on the bed. It would be nice to be here or somewhere like this every day. Here's Janie mixing up one of her concoctions in the test tube. Maybe when I grow up I can have an office. On the door it can say Harriet the Spy in gold letters. And then it can have office hours like the dentist store has, and underneath it can say any spy work undertaken. I guess I wouldn't put the price on the door. Then they'll have to come in and ask me. I can go there every day from 11 to 4 and write in my notebook. People will come in and tell me who to go and spy on, and I can go outside of office hours. I wonder if I will get any murder cases. I would have to have a gun and follow people, but I bet it would be at night, and I wouldn't be allowed out. Hey, Janie, if you're going to slit somebody's throat, wouldn't you do it in the dead of night? I'll poison them. Janie didn't even turn around. I bet you would, thought Harriet. But Janie, then they just trace the poison. Not the one I've got. Did you make a new one? Yes. Harriet went back to her notebook. Well, maybe there's something to this chemistry after all. I could poison Pinky and no one would even know it. I bet they'd need some new poisons. But old Golly says that in Washington, they've already got a little tube with a spoonful of something in it that will blow up the whole world. Maybe the whole universe. What would happen? Would we fly through the air? In space? You just float around? I would be lonely. Oh, boy, this is maddening. Janie stormed away from the lab table and sat down with her arms folded. What happened? Harriet looked up. I goofed, Janie said. If I'd done it right, it would have made a terrific noise. What would your mother have done? That's who the noise was for, silly. If they think I'll set foot in a dancing school, they're off their rockers. Why don't you blow up the dancing school? Harriet asked sensibly. Oh, they just find another place to have it. I know this kind of thing. Once they get this kind of idea in their heads, forget it. The only way out is to absolutely refuse. My mother hates to spend money, that's one thing. So if she could make a joke out of my not wanting to, then I'm in the clear, because she could save the money. Harriet knew what she meant. Mrs. Gibbs tried to make a bad joke out of everything. Mrs. Welch always spoke of Janie's mother as that smart-nosed Mabel Gibbs. Harriet thought to herself that one thing she couldn't stand was the kind of person who thought she was funny, and she wasn't. See, if she can get across to her friends the idea that I'm an impossible eccentric, then it won't be her fault that I'm not in dancing school. Janie went on. As for me, I couldn't care less if I learned to dance. I've got a big picture of Newton learning the Charleston. Janie had a definite mind. That was one thing you could say for her. Harriet admired it. There was a knock on the door. Oh, brother, Harriet said, and got up to answer it. It was Janie's mother. She gave her big horse laugh as she came into the room. Well, well, how's Dr. Caligari? She boomed and laughed again. It's a good thing she laughs, thought Harriet, because no one else ever does. Janie looked at her mother, stony face. Harriet did the same. That's my kid, a bundle of fun. And so saying, Mrs. Gibbs slapped Janie on the back with such a wallop that Janie almost fell on the floor. Recovering herself, she glared again, a hideous smile beginning to creep across her face. Yes, sir, that's my baby. No, sir, I don't mean maybe. Mrs. Gibbs began to sing in her rollicking way, while Harriet and Janie looked at the floor in a state of acute embarrassment. Noticing finally that she had no audience, Mrs. Gibbs stopped. Well, Harriet, she hollered, haven't seen you in a long time. Having a nice summer? Mrs. Gibbs never waited for an answer from children, thinking they were too shy to speak, which they always were around her, but zoomed in with her shouts. Talked to your mother the other day. Has Janie told you about dancing school? Your mother's all for it, and I am too. You girls need a few graces, you know, turning into young women any day now. Don't want to be clumps on the dance floor. Nothing more embarrassing than a wallflower. Your mother's worried about the way you move, Harriet. She suddenly focused on Harriet, waking her out of a reverie. Fast, said Harriet. That's the way I move. Fast. What's wrong with that? Mrs. Gibbs stared at her. Janie went back to her lab table. Mrs. Gibbs, not having any idea how to take Harriet's comment, decided, as she always did, that the best thing was to laugh it off. She gave an enormous whoop of laughter. Harriet saw Janie's shoulders go up in a quick, little, embarrassed cringe. "Well, now, aren't you something? Wait till I tell Harry that. You're as bad as Janie." She laughed a lot more, for good measure. "Well, we'll just see about that. I think you girls have something to learn. I think you have to find out your girls. I think we might get together, all us mothers, and blast a little sense into your heads." Her hand was on the doorknob. "And I don't mean your kind of blast, Dr. Jekyll." She started to open the door, and at that moment there was a terrific noise. Something on the lab table flew straight up in the air, and Mrs. Gibbs went through the door like a shot. Janie turned around, and they both looked at the door, through which came several different screams, and feet clattering as Mrs. Gibbs tore down the stairs, screeching, "Harry Gibbs, she's done it! Harry, come here! Harry, that maniac will kill us all! Harry Gibbs, come here! She's blown up the house!" They listened to a whispered colloquy in the downstairs hall, after Harry had run out saying, "What? What? What happened?" After the whispers, there was an ominous silence, during which they must have realized that the house was still standing. Then Harry's voice, "I'll go speak to her," and his feet beginning to climb. Harriet had no desire to watch Mr. Gibbs' tiny, perspiring face as he tried to cope with his daughter. It would only make it worse for him if she was there. "I think I'll just go down the back steps," she said gently, going toward the door. "I guess you better." Janie sounded tired. "Don't give up," Harriet whispered as she left. "Never," Janie whispered back. And that's the end of chapter 4. I'll see you soon.